said before, please do keep your mic on mute throughout the panel discussion to avoid distraction if you're not speaking, but you can use the chat, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen, and it'll show up on your right. And we will also give you a chance to ask panelists questions towards the end of the discussion. So let me officially introduce our panel, and then I'll introduce our moderator, Bill Bartholomew, and then I'll turn things over to him. And the authors, if you can say hello audibly so we can locate you on the screen when I say your name, that would be great. We'll get links to the authors' websites in the chat as well, so you can learn more about their work there, as well as we'll have a link to local bookstores in Rhode Island where you can purchase their books as well. Michael Fine, you want to say hello?
Hi.
Michael Fine, thank you, is a writer, community organizer, family physician, public health official, and author of Healthcare Revolt: How to Organize, Build a Healthcare System, and Resuscitate Democracy all at the same time. And Abundance, a romantic thriller set in Rhode Island and in Liberia in the aftermath of the Liberian Civil Wars of 1989 and 2020. Dr. Fine's new book, The Bowl and Other Stories, which was just released last month, tells 10 stories about people all across the country who struggle, survive, and see their world through lost hopes, inappropriate loves, and irrational dreams. JonLand, do you want to say hello?
How's everybody doing tonight?
Thank you, John. Thanks for being here. JonLand is the USA Today best-selling author of over 50 books, including 11 in the critically acclaimed Texas Ranger Caitlin Strong series, the most recent of which, Strong from the Heart, won the 2020 American Fiction Award for Best Thriller and the 2020 American Book Fest Award for Best Mystery Suspense Novel. Additionally, he has teamed up with Heather Graham for a science fiction series that began with The Rising and continues with Blood Moon. He has also written 6 books in the Murder, She Wrote series of mysteries and has recently taken over Margaret Truman's Capital Crime series, beginning with Murder on the Metro, which will be released in February 2021. A graduate of Brown University, he received the 2019 Rhode Island Authors Legacy Award for his lifetime of literary achievements. Vanessa Lillie is with us tonight. You want to say hello?
Hello.
Vanessa is the Amazon bestselling author of Little Voices, which received starred reviews in Publishers Weekly, Library Journal, and Best Debuts 2019 by Bolo Books. She's a board member of Sisters in Crime and has a weekly column in the Providence Journal. Her recently released thriller, For the Best, was a must-read in Pop Sugar and Crime Reads and an Amazon domestic thriller bestseller. She lives in Providence with her husband and sloth-obsessed 5-year-old son, who we have been warned may be making an appearance tonight.
Almost a certainty.
Great. All right, thanks, Vanessa. GWayne Miller, would you like to say hello?
Hello.
GWayne Miller is a Providence Journal staff writer, a filmmaker, a podcaster, and a visiting fellow at South Virginia University's Pell Center for International Relations and Public Policy, where he is co-founder and director of the Story in the Public Square program. He also co-hosts and co-produced the national tele-winning PBS TV SiriusXM satellite radio show, Story in the Public Square, a partnership of the Pell Center and the Providence Journal USA Today Network. He's also the author of 19 published nonfiction and fiction books, most recently the novel Blue Hill, published in Kindle, audio, and paper in October 2020. And Padma Venkatraman, do you want to say hello?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you so much for being here, Padma. Padma is the author of The Bridge Home, a 2019 Global Read Aloud and winner of WNDB's Walters Award, SCBWI's Golden Kite Award, South Asia Book Award. Along with her 3 previous novels, her work has won multiple awards and numerous honors. Her 5th novel, Born Behind Bars, is scheduled for October 2021 release from Nancy Paulson Books. Before becoming a full-time author and speaker, Padma worked as an oceanographer and traveled across the world before serving as a lecturer and diversity director at the University of Rhode Island. So thank you, panelists, so much for being here tonight. If you're just joining us, this is Writing During COVID. We've got links to the authors' websites in the chat, and we'll get a link to some local bookstores where you can check out their work as well. I want to introduce, not last but not least, is Bill Bartholomew, our moderator for tonight's panel. Bill is oh, you want to say hello, Bill? Sorry.
Hello.
Bill is a podcaster, broadcaster, and musician based in Providence. He is the host of Rhode Island's podcast of record, the Bartholomew Town podcast. We'll get a link to that in the chat as well as a correspondent for Rhode Island PBS's weekly news magazine and a regular contributor at WPRO Radio. A native Rhode Islander, he spent a decade in Brooklyn's indie art scene before returning to Rhode Island. He has appeared nationally on NPR, MTV, Showtime, Vice Noisy, and many other outlets. Bill, thank you so much for being with us tonight. I'm going to let you take things from here.
All right, a real pleasure, and thanks so much for coordinating this tremendous panel, and thanks to all of you who are out there taking time to partake in it. And let's get right into the discussion. I think that with COVID, all of our routines in general were so disrupted, and some may say in some senses for the better. I think from an artistic standpoint and from a process standpoint, I'm curious if we could kind of get into the upside, if you will, the silver lining of COVID. How has your routine, how has your creative process been affected by this? And let's start, if we could, with Padma.
I'm usually the one to go the last because my last name starts with a V, but I'm happy to go first this time. I have to say that I don't know, I think many of us might be introverts, and I certainly am. So for me, one of the, it's a double-edged sword for sure, because I do like to be out there speaking to people as well. But one of the things that this afforded me was just large chunks of time of seeing no one. And I could just be in my cabin in the woods potentially, which, it isn't a cabin in the woods, but, and just write and write and write without any distractions. And I have written a whole lot. So I think my process tends to be one which I say is vomit on the page. I say puke on the page and then clean up with bleach. And I certainly have done that because I've just been able to, let myself go and just write because I have so much more time.
Yeah, that's certainly a commonality, I think, for a lot of artists, and in some cases, perhaps too much time. Dr. Fine, though, I'm curious, with all that's going on in the world, in the real world on a daily basis, how are you able to kind of separate your role, if you will, or your expertise and being called upon from a medical side, and then get into the zone, find that process, find that space, given the climate?
It's actually been a little more difficult for me for the reasons you laid out. I was used to having a good part of the day to myself and really being able to reserve my mornings so that I wasn't disturbed at all. And that kind of has gone out the window. I now, unfortunately, have to pay attention to the news and to the numbers. And it's been a little more difficult to find that longer stretch of uninterrupted time. And I miss the time that I used to have before COVID, and I'm anxious for that time to come back. On the other hand, COVID has provided real grist for the mill. To me, this is almost, like a biblical plague, and it helps me reminds me pretty much every moment of the day what an incredible mess we made, and some of the incredible trouble that we're in because we've lost the ability to think and act as one people. So, where once in a while I used to be able to put that aside, no more.
Vanessa, similarly, I suppose for, or I guess potentially not similarly, but just tuning out the real world, getting into the zone. What's that been like for you?
Oh, very difficult. So we're moving on from silver lining, right? Now I can just talk about what it's really like.
Go for it.
So something I learned creatively that I did not know before this is that it's hard when people are like, oh, the muse didn't visit, or you have to have like a certain setup and whatever. And like, that's fine if that's the only way it works. But I do, for myself anyway, I don't cut myself any of that slack. Like if I have to write in the carpool line, if I have to write 10 minutes before the grocery store, right? Like you just have to find the time. But that said, this idea of kind of getting into the deeper creative zone, first of all, it's hard when you're worried about a global pandemic.
like your brain is just naturally going to float elsewhere. And then certainly if you have a chatty spouse who's suddenly at home or partner, for me, I had a 5-year-old who needed goldfish about every 3 minutes of his day. It's hard to really get in that deeper creative place where you can actually put your arms around a story, pull threads. You know, I think it's one thing to answer emails or edit something, but I really struggled to be able to find that deeper space that I think makes a novel kind of richer. And I just had no idea that I wouldn't be able to do it, you know, in the COVID setting until my kid went back to school.
Yeah, the real implications of kind of being locked in, you know, with other people. That's a factor as well. Wayne, you know, obviously you as a Providence Journal staff writer, and even through your work on the radio / Rhode Island PBS, you know, you have to juggle different styles of writing to produce in whichever space you're in. How has that been, sort of navigating writing prose versus writing content for the newspaper?
Well, I think earlier in the pandemic, you know, going back to January, I think I wrote the first story for the Journal about the pandemic that was to come. It was a bit easier because it wasn't clear what the outcome was going to be, how long the pandemic would last, how severe it would be. So we're now talking in the March timeframe. By April, it was very clear that this was going to be a long-term and very significant and very horrible situation. So early on, I was able to juggle the day job at the Journal and my creative writing. During that period, I finished a novel, Blue Hill, which was published just in October. But as the months went on, the day job, and I don't mean to trivialize it by using that term, but my obligations to the Providence Journal in terms of public service reporting and covering the coronavirus became more and more significant and time consuming. And that's really where a lot of my creative energy has gone recently, certainly recently, as you know, we have surge upon surge and hospitals are stressed and, you know, filled to overwhelming. And so, but I have no regrets or complaints about that. I mean, I think as a writer, in terms of what I do with the Journal, that's the important place to be right now. But would I like to be somewhere else? Of course. Wouldn't we all like to be somewhere else?
Yeah, there's no question about it. John, I'm curious about your process through all of this.
I tell people I've been practicing social distancing for 40 years. You know, it's not, being alone is not unusual for me. The interesting thing was it really didn't, because I'm in my bubble. You know, this is my bubble. You see, this is where I work right here. And I'm used to being in my bubble and I like my bubble. And I tell people that I love people. I'm an extrovert, but it's like a faucet. I've got to be able to turn it off and get behind the computer and do what I enjoy the most. The problem, the interesting dilemma or the interesting facet I found was that I couldn't turn it back on again because there was nothing to do. So what became striking to me was what someone else referred to as Blur's Day, because every day was the same. And what ended up happening, I'm very active with Brown University. When Brown University closed, I basically lost my social life. So there was no what I call mental vacations, no 3 hours spent at a Brown lacrosse game. You know, no football, no football practice, no movie theaters that were open, mental vacations, interludes, distractions, things where you recharge yourself. What I found, Bill, was that the entire day, because everything was about, if I wasn't doing an errand to Eastside Marketplace or CVS or Eastside Mart, my little convenience store, or walking on Blackstone Boulevard until they outlawed that, and then I had to walk around Blackstone Boulevard. It wasn't difficult, it just was that I was never able to get my mind off what it was stuck on. You know, I'd work out in my bedroom on an old Soloflex machine with dumbbells, resistance bands, all that kind of stuff, and I'd have MSNBC on, and I'd be watching stuff about the election, and I never got all the politics. I could never get away from all the politics, from the virus, It became like a sporting event, you know, rooting for the team that I wanted to win, rooting against the team I wanted to lose. But there was never getting away from that. The television was always on. The email, I couldn't get away from email. You know, it's like normally is a few hours every day where you're somewhere where you're not looking at your emails. You're not thinking of your emails or your text messages. But now, every time you get that click or that beep, it's like, oh, what just came in? No mental vacations. I did find it to be productive, but I'm always productive. So I don't think this affected my work level. It was nice at times not to have distractions. It was awful at times not to have distractions. You know, I've done 5 or 6 thrillers on pandemics, but I've never lived through one. And now I'll never write another book about one.
You know, what's interesting too, you mentioned the elections is concurrent to COVID-19 taking place, which obviously is the dominant story. We've been in an election year that had all these bizarre elements that we've never really experienced before. But of course, also, let's be honest about it, the social justice action that took place this year. So there's a lot of inspiration. There's a lot of lightning taking place, and you as the writer being that lightning rod, so to speak, and trying to capture the magic. How have you tapped into everything going on in the world without being able, for the most part, to leave your home? And let's start with Dr. Fine. Doctor, you're muted.
I've been able to leave my home a little bit, particularly over the summer.
Yeah.
And I'm lucky in that I have daily contact with people, particularly in Central Falls. So I have a real good sense, I think, day to day, or I'm kept up to date on kind of how people are thinking and how people are believing. And that really sort of lights a fire under me from a writing and an imaginative perspective. You know, the ability to hear the inner lives of other people really is sustaining. And that political foment, which I think for me has been as difficult and perhaps even more difficult than the pandemic itself, that political foment really keeps me fired and thinking about how to imagine the inner lives of people I disagree with, which is for me the biggest challenge.
Padma, same question. We'll kind of go through all the panelists, just sort of navigating all of this for the most part being, whether you're home or extremely limited, I suppose, and trying to serve as that lightning rod.
I think I've been on the streets carefully with COVID, with masks and everything else, and done more social activism in the last, ever since the pandemic began, than I have in the whole rest of my life, because it has been such an intense time for me. And I think the thing that happened with me was that I started writing things that I hadn't written that much before, which were op-eds, or, you know, whether it was for the Huffington Post, or, you know, I was very outspoken politically. I think I always have spoken my mind, but I think it drove me into a different kind of writing than the writing that I've done before. So it wasn't just fiction and poetry. It was also just very directly speaking to adults about so much that I am horrified by, that I always knew existed, by the way, because when I first came to this country, when I was about 19, I came to Southern Virginia, where I saw a tremendous amount of direct racism directed against me. So yes, I knew it existed, but me and a lot of other people were finally tired, sick and tired of seeing it so blatant. And honestly, when you say election season, I don't think it's ended yet at all, because there are still so many lies being promoted. And, you know, I think about Peter Pan, and how Peter Pan there's a book with a lot of problems, but he speaks about how, you know, this whole idea of, if you say you don't believe in fairies, fairies die. Well, if you don't believe that the election is fair, a democracy dies, and not enough people are speaking up. And, you know, so I will shut up right there, but I think it's driven me into a very sort of directly activist writing that I never did before.
Yeah, and Wayne, in your newspaper just today, an interesting article that here in Rhode Island, only one of the Republican members of the General Assembly were willing to comment on who won the presidential election. What has it been like for you trying to navigate this multitude of situations and still be creative?
Well, starting with the murder of George Floyd at the end of May, obviously we at the Journal, myself included, have written about that, about the Black Lives Matter movement being re-energized, refreshed, and basically making it to the front page. In addition to that, I started a novel about the modern media a short while ago, not this year, but in a previous year. This social justice movement and refreshing of the movement today has worked its way into that novel. And I make notes all the time. I haven't gotten to as much of that writing as I would like to, but it has become a theme in that novel, which I hope to complete next year. So in terms of my writing, both, with the Providence Journal and my fiction writing, the novel that I mentioned about media, which is tentatively titled Paperboy, it's been significant, inescapable, and vitally important. And I totally agree with what Padma said. This has influenced all of us as writers and also as citizens of our great republic. Maybe not so great right now, but hopefully great again soon.
Vanessa, same general question. Navigating everything.
Yeah, I agree. I've also been more politically active. My last book, For the Best, started from a feeling about trying to sort out white feminism. It was during the Women's March, and I saw a photograph of a Black female protester, Angela Peoples, holding the sign up that said, don't forget white women voted for Trump. And for me, that was a big moment to just realize how far I and my fellow white women had to go. I'm from Oklahoma, from a rural place. I mean, I grew up hearing the N-word regularly. Racism is not a surprise to me. It's, certainly a terrible poison. But I think what was kind of creatively what I had to explore is how much I have a role in racism, how much I let pass, how much I expect as a white woman for things to be. And there were just like a lot of really hard questions that I asked myself as I wrote this book and just on the book tour and things like that, talking about it, because, to me, it's something that I need to own up to. And it's also a conversation I want to have. And being a thriller writer, I think very particularly we have an obligation to be political, and we write about justice and truth and death and murder, and almost always rooted in crimes that happen in real life. So, I very much took the social justice elements that thankfully have risen, and also within my profession in publishing, it's a very white profession. Only within the past few years are we finally seeing kind of an own voices movement, and white authors aren't co-opting the stories of people of color, at least carte blanche anymore. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to continue these conversations creatively, but also just as an industry.
John?
Let me just add, because
please.
I quote unquote curate Vanessa's diary. I actually just take what she writes and put it in the paper because it doesn't need any curating. We've seen that in Vanessa's columns almost from the start. I mean, and kudos to you, Vanessa. It's one of our best read features, and it's very important. So thanks for doing it. Keep it up, and we look forward to more.
Super nice. Thank you. I'm honored.
Yeah, it's definitely a critical part of our the media diet here in Southern New England, no doubt about it. John, that same question as we kind of wrap up this point of the discussion.
I was listening to Padma, and it made me think what I've taken out of these last 10 months. If you want to know what America is, Padma is America. More than anything else I've seen, this is what America is. And what has become blatantly so annoying and so disheartening and so disconcerting is that there's this 30% of assholes, morons, crazies, who are outside people's houses they pick times when they're the local selectman or the election officer is at a meeting, and they go outside the house and they start terrorizing the children. I challenge anyone to explain to me how that can be right. Defend that. I would like someone to defend that kind of behavior to me. And it all starts at the top. It starts at the example. You want to look at America, look at Padma. You want to look at anti-America, look at the White House. It's so horrible. It's so despicable. I write villains for a living. I've written a villain who's I can't even read chapter 41 of Strong Vengeance. I once read it out loud in something like this, and I literally got chilled. I can't read it because of the introduction of the villain, and I won't go into details about why. But I will say this. The President of the United States today is bigger and worse than any villain I could possibly imagine, and I'll tell you why. Because every villain I've ever created has redemptive qualities. Hannibal Lecter, I didn't create him, but he's charming. In the end, Darth Vader turns to the bright side of the Force and saves his son. We have a president who not only has not a single redeeming quality, who is the ultimate villain in fact or fiction, but he has mobilized an army of discontented people who are so anti-American, which makes no sense to me. It makes no sense to me because what makes America great is civility. And these people have been mobilized they're the antithesis of the Black Lives Matter movement. They're the antithesis of a country where someone like Padma can come over here at the age of 19 and realize her dream. If it were up to our president, I hate even want to call him that. If we're up to the guy in the White House now for the next 40 days or whatever it is, Padma would not be here right now. And if there are any Trump supporters on this, I'm sure there are out there, I want someone to defend that for me. Because that's what I take out of living too much in my head, living too much, watching too much cable television over these last 9 months. It's become, where are these people coming from? What are these people saying? I mean, 50% of 25% of the country thinks that President Obama murdered SEAL Team 6 and Osama bin Laden is hiding in Pennsylvania. What are we dealing with here? And as writers, as a thriller writer, when you think about, and I'm going on a little bit here, but when you think about what current events do to thrillers, Watergate gave us the Robert Ludlum novels and the conspiracy movies, and Reagan gave us Tom Clancy. 9/11 gave us this the Brad Taylor novels, the Vince Flynn books about Navy SEALs and heroes. What is COVID going to give us? What is going to be the post-COVID? What is post-COVID literature going to look like? What are kids going to be like who have been basically lost a year of their development? There's a lot of stuff, in other words, we don't know yet. And what we do know, there is some positive. There are a lot of heroes out there. But man, have we got villains galore in this country. And someone, I think it was Wayne, said, hopefully we get back to normal or back to where we were. We're never getting back to where we were. This is not a blip. This is a paradigm shift. And as writers, how is that going to affect us? How is that going to affect the marketplace? How is that going to affect publishers? It's going to be an interesting next few years.
Couldn't agree more. And I think that kind of bleeds into where I'd imagine the discussion kind of going, which is, the responsibility of someone who has the gift of the ability to write, whether you're talking songwriting, whether you're talking, I guess, anyone who is a motif, if you're able to paint, if you're able to make films, if you're able to take words and make them meaningful and have an impact, that's a gift. And it's something that I think many of you would agree comes with a responsibility. We even see here locally right now where there's a humongous disconnect between what we're hearing from our administration and what some people are seeing on the ground. You know, you go to certain communities and it's a lot different than what we hear at our press conferences with the governor. So as a writer, how do we bridge those gaps? And I guess, how do you process that responsibility and use your output as a way to be that light for anyone out there who's looking for it? Let's start with the great GWayne Miller.
I guess my first response would be that writers now as ever will write what they feel is most important to them. So I wouldn't want to sort of dictate or demand that writers do one thing or another. But I do think that given where we are, what we've been through, and what we're still going to go through, that many writers should and will reflect the pandemic, the political structure of this country, the divisions in this country, the things that have happened over the last 4 years, the hope and promise of the new administration. Hopefully we'll reflect that and write about that, whether it's in daily journalism, whether it's in long form journalism, or in novels or screenplays or whatever. Having said that, I think it's unquestionably true that most writers will, in some respect, some regard, deal with this in their own individual way, whether it's in fantasy, whether it's in fiction, whether it's in journalism. However, how could it be otherwise? I mean, look, I've written about mental health for decades, longer than probably some of the people on this call have even been alive. It's been my journalistic passion. What we are seeing now in terms of mental health, the effect on individuals, the long-term effects, the immediate effects, the healthcare workers, children. I worry so much about children. The PTSD that is already being felt, that will be felt for years to come, generations to come, depending on where you are, whether you're living in an economically deprived area, depending on your zip code, depending on your health inequities. And Michael Fine, who is the master of writing about this, how can we not write about this? How can we not write about this? And I think it's incumbent upon us, those of us who feel that we should, and again, I'm not trying to dictate what writers do, because I would, God forbid I would ever do that. And by the way, that would be like herding cats, vitally important. So going forward, I know in my own writing, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, fiction, this will be a significant theme.
Vanessa.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Just to add a little bit onto the kind of the reverberations that we, can't even see directly to COVID, and then just, people not being able to bury their family, people not being able to say goodbye when they pass. I think there's so much pain, and often that's what, a lot of why we write is to put our arms around it, or just explore or process it. And I think there's so much pain right now, pain we don't even realize, and writing and creativity and any outlet that allows you to process pain is as important as almost anything else. And so, the more we have opportunities what Cheer and organizations that give people a place to connect and share and express what they've gone through, and whatever means that is, we just have to encourage it, because I don't know how else you can process that much pain. I don't, if everyone had access to therapy or something, maybe, but I think for a lot of people, it might just come down to a journal or a piece of paper and a pencil. And so I think have to be really mindful of that and really supportive of arts organizations.
Phil, let me add a moment of hope, as it were, here. I've talked about this on Story in the Public Square. I've talked about this with friends and family. I look toward young people with great hope. And I'm going to give you an example of why. This is within my own family. I have a 16-year-old granddaughter who is a wonderful young woman who, since the murder of George Floyd and during this pandemic, has become politically active. Her Christmas list includes books about racism, systemic racism, And I think she is representative of a large group of people. And if you look at some of the stories, the analyses of who voted or who would vote in the election, we see the young people, they're our future. You know, and Padma, I know you have a young child, and other people here, of course, do as well, and people who are not here, obviously. I just want to inject a note of optimism here, because as bleak as things are now, there is hope. And by the way, a vaccine is coming, and that, you know, I wrote about that today, and we'll keep writing about that. So as gloomy as things are, you know, keep a good vibe, as it were.
Nothing more important potentially right now, that morale element, right? It's
Right.
critical for all of us. Padma, same question.
So I was thinking about a few things, and thank you, Wayne, for pointing out the hope that we need to have, and I certainly do agree. And I think that even as adult writers, it's so important for us to keep that hope alive in the younger generation, because yes, absolutely, I do see activism. I mean, my daughter was on NPR reading her This I Believe essay at 12, and she at 12 organized her own Black Lives Matter protest.
Wow.
So I felt very heartened by that, and to see all that she continues to do. And yes, we need to foster that. But there are some things that I think are also very important when we have conversations with each other, as well as with anybody older or younger. I came from a situation where I was not very privileged in India, and several Asian writers who come here have come from extremely wealthy backgrounds. When I came here, I was not. And so I think it's very important and still I was not like anywhere close to the poverty line in India, but there are people out there in India and across the world who have so little. And so while I don't like pain comparisons, because everybody's pain is important, and I do mean that everyone's pain needs to be held, I think it is so important for us to realize the privileges that we have. And I, as a brown female, also am aware that even though I have experienced so much racism in my life, I have brown privilege that people who are Black do not. And so, there are levels and levels of that. And for us to be able to accept our privilege and to encourage everyone around us to see that and accept the privileges that they do have, because nearly every one of us, if you have a computer, you have some kind of privilege, I think. And so, so just to think about that, I think is so important to me going forward as a human being, if nothing else. And I think two more things that I think are so important for me. We've been talking about COVID so much. The other thing that we haven't really spoken about, which of course actually benefited because of COVID, is global climate change. I used to be an oceanographer. It is happening, and just along with understanding that there was no election fraud, I think it is so vital that we understand and not only educate people about climate change in whatever form we can, but also start taking steps. I mean, to me, it's been so important to model for my daughter what I can do, what I can give up. And that to me has been a very important question that I've been thinking about a lot. Own voices is not just about, raising own voices, but also thinking about that, what can I give up? And I think that's really important. What am I willing to give up in terms of the globe, of everything politically and so on? So I think that's something that's very important to me. And finally, one thing that I think is so easy to do, because for the most part, as writers, we're very liberal. And it's so easy, as John said, to spend all your time watching an MSNBC. And while I don't think you should start watching Fox, I do think it's so important for us on those rare occasions when those other people with different political or religious or whatever beliefs reach out or even engage you in some way. It's so easy to just push away that hand because of the anger that we have, because of the impatience. And I would never rule against someone who does that, because I've been there. I have done it too. But if we can keep our hands open, if we can at some level try to maintain that connection to the extent possible without damaging ourselves, and certainly look after ourselves first, that I think is so important, because I see more and more that with social media and everything else being a bubble of its own, that we end up associating with people who think like us, which is fine, but then the other people never hear or see the rest of the truth. So on those rare occasions when we have those opportunities to just engage in whatever way, that is really an engagement, not just shouting at them as writers and saying, shut up,
Amen.
I couldn't agree more. I think that's just such a critical element for everyone, but especially those who are in the arts, and especially those who are writing in any way, shape, or form, to regularly, I would say, even engage with people of different political viewpoints, and try not to even necessarily belittle them, even if you vehemently disagree, because there's a chance that you will be able to sell what you believe in to that person. Before we go to John and Dr. Fine here, I just want to let everyone know that after these next two comments, we're going to move to audience questions. The way this will be mechanically, we'll deal with it is by raising a hand in the participants portion of Zoom. So I figured I'd give everybody a heads up to figure out how to do that. It's pretty simple. You go to participants, and let's see. Well, I'm in the wrong place. I'm co-host. So let me see how to explain this easier. There's a little hand. You want to raise it. We'll explain it in more detail in a moment after I figure out how to explain it to you. During the next two people will speak. We'll start with Dr. Fine, talking about the responsibility of the artist in the time of COVID.
I think we have a huge responsibility, not just in the time of COVID, but as Padma said, in the time of climate change, of racism and sexism, and all the other chaos that we have that confronts us as human beings. We kind of have a holy responsibility to tell the truth, and perhaps even to do more than that, to show the truth, and to create the story that brings us together as one people. That's the real challenge, not to turn, people I disagree with into somebody who's the enemy, but to find a story that we can both hear together. So we have one story as one people and can be one people instead of being so divided. In a certain way, the lesson of COVID is that this is what happens when you are divided, when you've let yourself be picked apart. And that's our job is to change that. COVID, SARS-CoV-2 is a cold virus. From the perspective of infectious diseases, this is nothing. This kills between 0.4 and 0.6 or 7% of the people who get it. Ebola kills 50 to 75% of the people who get it. This is the warm-up. This is the warning. And this is what happens when we can't function together. Compare us to other countries like South Korea or Japan, where there are next to no deaths and almost no infections, and they have robust economies and a full life. Somehow our job is to tell the story in a way that lets people hear it, that gets beyond the numbers and into the sort of human meaning of what it's like to be so divided, and conversely, what it would be like for us to be one people again.
Very well said. And John, the responsibility of the writer.
The bond between the reader and the writer is a sacred, intimate bond. It's equivalent to when you're a little kid and it's time to go to bed and you say to your mother, father, grandfather, grandmother, tell me a story. And they open a book or they tell you a story. They sit down on your bed and your imagination opens up before you fall asleep, and you close your eyes and you see that world that they're creating. The imagination doesn't age. We age. Our minds age. Our brains age. Our imagination stays the same. I write from that imagination to the reader's imagination. And my job is to do the most important thing anyone in entertainment can do, which is to provide 2 hours of just what I said, of entertainment, of taking 2 or 3 or 4, if it's a movie, 2 hours, if it's a book, 6, 8, whatever, however long it takes to read. And in that period, the reader is not in their world anymore. They're in the world I've created. I've taken them out of COVID. I've taken them out of politics. I've taken them out of everything. And I've given them, for however long they want to read one of my thrillers, I'm able to speak to their imagination, not their conscious mind, their subconscious mind, into my world that I've created, so that just for that period of time, nothing else matters. The biggest compliment, the compliments that mean the most to me, are when I hear from people who take my books to chemo treatments and it gets them through 4 or 5 hours of intravenous chemo, or it got someone through recently an airplane flight where they were going home to their father's funeral and they read one of my books on the plane. And for those 4 hours, they weren't thinking about the tragedy they were going home to. I think that being able to take someone out of their world is a tremendous responsibility. But it's also a great gift. That's what I've always said is my goal. I like to think it's a gift, because when other writers give it to me, I know how much it means. And I want to give that same gift to others so they can experience that mental vacation, that distraction from a world that just feels too big and too bad. And you feel so helpless at times in it. But when you're reading, when you're watching a great movie, you're not checking your phone, you're not looking at your email, you are in a different world. And that is what I want to continue to do.
Well said by all of our panelists tonight, particularly in this last round of questions here. I think that, it shouldn't be overstated. And I know we have many writers in this group here today that, just the role you play in society is just so important and valued as well, in those moments of crisis, especially, right? Let's be honest about it. Okay. So at this point, we're going to shift gears. We're going to go to audience questions. So luckily, someone else, Jodie, figured out or knew how to manipulate the raise hand, and I'll read it out loud if you didn't see it in the chat. So to raise your hand digitally, just click on the participants at the bottom of your screen. You'll see an option to raise hand, and when you do so, I will see it, and we will unmute you and bring you on to ask a question to the panel or a panelist of your choice. So have at it. Anybody else? Okay, let's see. We'll start with Don. And let me just get, you are unmuted. Are you unmuted, Don? Let's test.
I am, I think so.
Beautiful. Don.
So how you doing? It's a pleasure. It's the first time that I even was aware of this group, and happened to see Wayne's Twitter and thought I would, dial in. Wayne and I know each other a little bit. My son was the director of his television program for a number of years, and Wayne is very successful. So it's a pleasure.
Hi, Don.
I've really enjoyed the interviews and discussion, kind of a wide ranging discussion about writing. I'm working on my first novel. I wrote a business book a few years ago, and boy, is that dramatically different. So I'm really enjoying the journey, and I'm in the final stages of it. I just wanted to bring up one thing when Wayne had mentioned about the next generation, younger people, and a family member, I think 16-year-old young lady in your family, with organizing or getting involved with things like Black Lives Matter, etc. My grandson, who happens to be Scott's nephew, last year he was 15, now he's 16 this year, and he had a great interest in learning about veterans that have been in wars. And he's a big movie fan. So he was interested in talking to some veterans to see, you know, how real are these movies, et cetera. But he was interested in them in general as people. And so my wife, my daughter had an opportunity to have him meet some veterans. And over a period of time, they really enjoyed him. They saw that he was serious. He took notes, him and another friend. And a lot of these guys have been in war 50 years ago and had seen all kinds of things. And they usually don't even talk about it. He ended up filming them, 8 veterans, over a period of 2 days. And it's put together a documentary, and it's amazing. I mean, they still have to work out the editing and everything, but it's amazing how they opened up to this young man. They told him about things about how they either got drafted or boot camp, but the war, but also coming home from the war and going to VFW posts that people didn't want to talk to them because they were in the Vietnam War and they were 19 years old and weren't even sure what was going on. So I just wanted to mention that like Wayne, and I'm sure there's so many young people out there. I think Time Magazine is doing a cover on a young woman that I saw, I think 15 years old.
Yeah,
So,
Kid of the Year. Yeah.
right. So, you know, I'm just saying kudos to them. And I think we have to bring, we're the generation that has to bring them up and give them opportunities.
Or Don, you make a good point. I would love to see that documentary when it's done. I think young people relating to older people, the older people relating to the young people rather, may be more open, may be more expressive because they realize they're looking at, you know, a fresh voice, somebody, people who are not, you know, longer, more advanced in life and have firm opinions and whatever. So this all sounds great.
Yeah. And the interesting thing, I'll leave you with this here, there was one of the soldiers who had brought his uniform. And he said to Jack, gee, you're about my size. And Jack tried the uniform on and it actually fit him.
Oh, wow.
But I think what they saw in him and his friend, and they were 15, now they're 16, is I think they saw themselves at that young age that they were
Right.
just coming out of high school. Some of them volunteered and were going to be gung-ho. Others were drafted. And obviously it was life-changing. I mean, they talked about, you know, one fellow talked about going through being divorced a couple of times and going through other relationships that he struggled with. And he's talking to a young man here, you know, so it is pretty interesting. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Don. And no question that one of the major stories of 2020 is Generation Z and really everything that we've seen from an organizing perspective on climate change, social justice, and it's fascinating stuff. And how does that tie into creativity and writing going forward? It's good stuff there. Rick Claypool is up next. I have asked to unmute. Are you able to do so? Beautiful.
Oh, did I?
We are good.
Oh, he's back on. Oh,
There I am. Okay. Sorry. So thanks, everyone. This has been phenomenal. Just appreciate all the insights you have to share. You know, one of the things that occurs to me, I'm a pretty fresh author. I just had my second book, a novella, come out earlier this last month, and you know, it's one of the things that's been jarring or like sort of, you know, irks me or I don't know, strikes me in a certain way, you know, during the situation is, you know, being active and, you know, engaged in politics and everything, and the seriousness of COVID, and at the same time, like, okay, book just came out that I have to shamelessly shill for, which just feels, you know, I mean, I kind of, you know, force myself to do it, but there's just those times when it feels crass, even as, you know, you try to do it in an effective and non-crass way. But I would just be interested in any thoughts or, you know, that any of you all might have on that, you know, negotiating that.
I'll jump in. So self-promotion is always kind of makes you feel, it can feel a little icky. I think a lot of authors feel that way, but it is a part of the business, and it would be nice if we could just create and that would be it. But, you know, finding ways to connect with readers is very important as well. And I would just say that for me, it's finding things that I enjoy from a marketing perspective and not doing the things that stress me out. So like if a newsletter is something you're interested in and building readership that way, if you like Instagram, if you like Facebook, if you like, you know, writing short stories and submitting them and like sharing them with people, you know, I think it's an opportunity. It can be an opportunity if we're able to kind of look at it like that, even though it does feel a little, I mean, icky sometimes but the thing is that to me, and is that that's kind of more an internal criticism, right? Like very rarely people have been like, oh, you've been promoting your book too much, or, oh, I wish you wouldn't have mentioned it. It's always, oh yeah, you have a book out. Oh yeah, I meant to get that. You know what I mean? So even though it feels like you're talking about it a lot, you probably aren't. And the more you're able to do it in as authentic to you and authentic to how you like to communicate, I think the better it can feel.
So let me give you a story from my authorial life. The first nonfiction book I sold was sold to a young man by the name of Jonathan Karp. He had been a writer at the Journal, a staff reporter right out of Brown many, many years ago. He left the Journal, he went to the Miami Herald, and then he answered an ad in Publishers Weekly to be a junior editorial assistant at Random House. And he took that job. And so he reached out to me. I did 4 books with John Karp, but early on he said, if you're going to be in this business, you have to learn how to market yourself. And that was something I had no interest in doing. You know, I'm a writer. I sit in back of a keyboard or in front of a pad or whatever. I write the book, throw it out there. Good luck. Hope it works. Not how it works in the business. So he imparted to me that lesson. John Karp now is the publisher of Simon & Schuster. We've remained in touch over the years, but that was a vital lesson. It was not something I did easily, not something I wanted to do. I still, you know, like Vanessa, sometimes feel like, I really don't want to do it. I wish I didn't have to do it. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending how you look at it, it's part of the business. And if you want to be a published writer and you want to have any degree of quote unquote success, and I don't mean, you know, being a bestseller, but selling a few books at least, you know, you have to do it. So good luck. I still don't like it.
Anybody else with thoughts on that matter from our distinguished panelists? Yeah, and of course, also just speaking to what we talked about with that responsibility, you know, it's part of the job of serving the people, you know, and it is icky, but boy, is it important to be able to get your work out to the people, you know, that's part of it. So great question. All right, next up we have Cindy, and I've asked to unmute you. Let's see if it is effective.
Nope.
Oh,
Yeah,
we're
there we
good.
go.
There we go.
Hi, Cindy.
Hello. Hey, thanks for being here, everyone. This is wonderful. It's inspiring. I've been looking forward to this evening. Hi, Wayne.
Hi, Cindy.
Good to see you. So I have 2 questions. I'll try and keep them quick. One is, most of my creative writing has been poetry over the many, many decades. And I am venturing slowly, painfully into fiction and have a lot of false starts. And so I'm curious, particularly from Padma, who does both, and if any of the others of you do both, any thoughts on that? And my other question is, I am a sporadic journaler from my childhood days. You know, I would keep a journal I seem to do it during pivotal points in my life, and then I would just drop it for 6 months and then pick it up again. And I'm always really embarrassed and horrified when I go back and read it but I've been doing it since just before the pandemic started. And I go back and I look at it and I look at this dawning awareness, this innocence, this sort of lack of understanding of what my world was or was going to be. And it was teaching me a little bit about how my own brain works, that I could have known so little just 6 or 8 months ago, and that I'm a different person now. So my other question is just how journaling has maybe played into how you develop characters that have have this growth over time, because they just can't see the door. They can't see through the door they're about to walk through. So those are my 2 questions.
So the first one, the thing that I want to say is this: for me, and again, this is not everybody's writing, but my writing tends to be very poetic. I think my prose even tends to be very poetic. So I think you're off to a very good start if you love poetry. I sincerely believe that, poets have a way that they can write fiction that is absolutely evocative and beautiful and stunning. So I think that's, it's not something that will hold you back. It's in fact something that I think will, if you really want to, and there's no, I don't think that you have to, but certainly if you really want to get into fiction, I think that will actually come with you and be an advantage ultimately. So I think that's something important to remember, is that you're starting off at a place of advantage, really. And the other thing that I want to say is this: I do sometimes sit around polishing something to death, like one scene.
Yes.
And that is because the poet in you says, I can write this poem again and again, ad nauseum. In fact, until the day I die, and it will never be perfect.
Yeah.
And maybe sometimes those revisions, the thing to tell yourself is maybe sometimes those revisions take away. You can only polish something so much before you start to actually erode it.
Mm.
And so I think, putting a stop on that, and also if you are interested in writing a novel, and if that for whatever reason, again, it doesn't have to happen. And that's something that I always tell people, because sometimes we say, oh, there are people who think the novel is the most important thing, or people who think poems are the most important thing. Whatever comes to you is important. So that's something to remember. But if you do want to write a novel, the other thing I think that's important is to just go ahead and write a lot of rubbish. That's fine. Give yourself permission to write a lot of junk, and finish it. Get to a point where you feel that there is something that you can work with, at least bricks that you can work with, if not the skeleton of a house. At least the bricks are there, and then you can go back and revise. So if you find yourself endlessly revising the first page, force yourself to say, I'm going to write 100 pages or whatever it is, 500 pages at least, before I come back and look at the first one.
That's so helpful, and you nailed it for me. That's absolutely my challenge. Yeah.
I think the issue is, for all writers, you have to, and I would say about poetry and novels, by the way, just as an aside, many would say that the greatest American novel of the 20th century was Deliverance. At least it's up there. That was written by a poet, James Dickey. That's how I think James Dickey started writing in poetry. So it worked out great for him. It can for you too. But the most important thing for writers, and it's fun to be talking to a group of writers, is you have to know who you are. You have to know what you want to write and how you want to write, not how someone tells you to write. What do you love to read? Because whatever you love to read, that's probably what you should be writing. I love to read thrillers. So I'm a thriller writer, and I'm a storyteller. I've never spent anywhere near an hour on a page, never mind a week or a day, like some writers do. I'm a storyteller. I'm about the beginning, the middle, and the end. I'm about cliffhanger chapter endings and hooks at the beginning of every chapter. It's manipulative, but it's what I love to read. It's what I love when writers do to me when I'm reading their books. So for me, you're reading me for entertainment, because I write for myself. Remember, all of us writers, almost everyone here is a writer. You know, Don just started and other people have been doing it for a while. You be true to yourself, but you have to know you are the first person who reads what you write. So not only are you a writer, are you writing it, you're also reading it and experiencing it firsthand as like your first reader. So you have to love, and you have to love what you write. That's my model. You write a great story, and it's a story that you would read if someone else had written it. That's what I try to do every day. Write a great, not just writing, it's telling. Tell a great story. Now, how each of us define story is going to be different. I'm all about conflict. I'm all about pace. I'm all about suspense. That's what I do. That doesn't mean it's right for you, but that's me. So finding your own voice, which I think, Cindy, is what you're kind of getting at. Once you find your voice, it's kind of like finding your identity. And then then writing is no longer work. You just sit down and it just comes out. You don't struggle at all because you know who you are, and you trust enough in the process and in your own imagination and subconscious that it will get you where you need to go.
So Cindy, I have a question for you. You've been journaling since the start of the pandemic. How often do you write into your journal?
So it just so happens, because I'm a leap year child, that and I had my 15th leap year this year, that a few days before leap year, February 29th, I started writing every day. And in part because I was thinking of it as my leap year journal. And almost throughout the pandemic, there have been weeks where I've written in it every day. Then because my work, like Dr. Fine, my work kind of swamped me for a while because I was working around COVID issues. I think I went a month maybe with nothing, and then come back to it. And so it's a combination of what's going on in my life and what's going on in the world. And honestly, it almost makes me weep looking back at it, like I say, just because of so much we didn't know.
Well, let me just say that what you are doing is, for you, potentially a treasure. Whether you write from that now or in a year or 5 years or 10 years, it's something very valuable, something that may produce a work that you can't even anticipate now. At the very least, it's a memoir of your life during this time. And on a very practical level, because I've been burned on this more than once, and I learned, make sure that you back it up in a safe place, whether it's Dropbox or whatever, because you don't want to lose it. This is something valuable and very important. And I applaud you for doing it. I started doing that in March myself. And it was like, I couldn't do it. It was like, I had so many other things going. I wish now I had. I actually had little sticky notes, write your diary in the morning, and I get up in the morning and like the journal wanted me to do this and this other thing wanted me to do that, and I didn't. So you've got something very valuable here.
I think that the contact tracing notebook, that whole concept helped me to keep up with it, because I said, at the very least, I'm going to write down everybody that I saw today.
Well, Gina's very happy for you.
Probably the best thing that came out of that whole operation right there, for sure. So.
Thank you very much. It's very helpful, all of you.
And thanks a lot, Cindy. And our next question comes from Betsy, and I've unmuted you as well. Or have I not?
Yes. This is actually responding to Cindy's question. I've been keeping a pretty much daily journal since I was in college, which was a long time ago. It's just part of what I do. and I don't know what to do with them. And I don't know whether I want my children to ever see them. So that as I get older, that's a dilemma. But what I wanted to say is the Rhode Island Historical Society, and I think the Providence Public Library is working with them, are very eager to collect COVID journals. That's the raw material for people 20 years from now to be able to say, what was the lived experience of living through COVID? So any of us that are journaling, and my journal is full of, sometimes it's COVID and a lot of times it's politics and legal cases because I used to be a lawyer. And sometimes it's about my kids and sometimes it's about my mother. And, you know, it's a lot of different things. So I'm going to end up, I think, distilling out the COVID part to give to them. But if you journal or if you write a blog or if you write emails to friends, they would love to have that. And the novelists 25 years from now who want to know what was it like to live through this set of multiple challenges and catastrophes will be grateful to you. And you won't be around, some of us won't be around to see it, but it'll be there. So that's all.
Betsy, I think that's a very, very important point and a great contribution that people can make because you're totally right on every count of what you said. Valuable in the archives for future generations and people to look back and see the learned experience of individuals like yourself. So good for you.
Well, I'm a historian and I write history, and I've written a historical novel that I don't know if it'll ever get published, but diaries and letters and things like that are just invaluable. It's the way we know what it was like to live in South County or Newport in the middle of the 18th century, which I needed to know for my novel. So, but those only exist if people keep them, and preferably not just in Microsoft Word, which doesn't last. So anyway, so it's, as a historian and as a historical fiction writer, that I really want people to be making the raw material.
Let me give you the perspective of a non-journaling person. I've never done anything like that in my life. I've never had a desire to. And I'm speaking now to the novelists in the group that's watching us and with the What Cheer group. Journaling is a great exercise in every conceivable way except one. It doesn't necessarily, well, it actually could, but you have, for journaling to be an effective exercise, let me put it this way. What you want to be able to do as novelists is learn to be able to journal in someone else's voice other than your own. That's character development. Because in order to write, and it's Betsy, you've done them both. You've done a journal and you've also done historical fiction. But I've worked or been around writers at conferences who have journaled, and they don't know how to make the jump from journaling to creating, to telling a story. And the answer to that is you do the same thing, because before you can write in your journal, you're thinking. Before a character you create acts, he or she thinks. So I think journaling is a great exercise. But if you're talking about making a living, if you're talking about becoming professional at this, that's all it is. Because it's not what you're writing to be published. I never write anything that I don't hope will be published or I don't already know that's going to be published. And that makes me very, very commercial. But you know what? Being commercial is what allows you to write professionally. And what separates a good storyteller, a bad storyteller from a great storyteller, an excellent storyteller, is the ability to channel what you're able to do for yourself in your journal for all the characters you're creating, knowing where their voice is coming from, knowing what motivates them, knowing what moves them, what makes them cry, what makes them laugh. Because if you're writing a novel, if you're writing in third person, you're writing in multiple POVs. First person, you're only writing in one POV. Now I do both. You know, when I write Murder, She Wrote, I write in first person. It's very confining. When I write everything else, I'm in third person, which is much more natural. So for those out there who are fiction writers, and maybe they're journaling too, but even if you're not, think about how do you find the voice of your characters? How do you make it so you don't write their dialogue? They speak it and you just type it. So that's just an alternative, because I love what everyone's saying about journaling, but it's not for everyone. And it's especially not necessarily for fiction writers.
I actually found, because journaling is something that I do, I actually did some journaling for my characters.
I've done that too.
and that was really helpful, especially for my villain, who people told me was too one-dimensional. And I started.
Did you use the content of the journals? Did you put some of that content into a book as in italics or in something like that to distinguish it?
No, what I ended up doing was incorporating some of it into dialogue. I had him interacting with another character in which his story and his sort of what was driving him came out, but it came out in dialogue, and it came out in little bits that I had gained by writing his first person story. Anyway, I'll let other people chime in.
Just two quick thoughts. So my first novel, my debut novel, actually, the way that I got into it was exactly what John said. So I actually wrote a diary. The entire novel I wrote initially as a diary. And then I got to know my characters so well that then I could write it in third person. But I will say one thing, and if you keep a diary for yourself though, I think it can still be useful. I went back to diaries that I had kept as a child, and after that, I actually haven't been able to do very much of that because I was an oceanographer and a writer, and a mom, and I did so many other things that I didn't have time. But I went back to it was childish writing, but it still allowed me to connect with a particular time or a particular incident. And the Bridge Home is actually based on characters friends whom I had contact with when I was a child. And even though I didn't use any of the actual words, what a diary can do is act as a sort of time travel device. It can take you and put you back into that time, and then you can reimagine it. So I think it does have value in some sense, even if it isn't necessarily a very literary something that you're doing.
Well, great question and great prompt. At this point, I don't see any other questions. I'll sort of do the standard issue. If anyone has we can probably squeeze in one more quick question. Kind of going once, going twice. And I do not see the hand raised by anyone. So with that, I will hand it back over to Jodie. And thank you all so much for this. Has been just a truly robust and exciting discussion. So thanks, Jodie.
Thank you, Bill. Thanks so much for those thought-provoking questions. And thank you to all our panelists for such an insightful discussion. Thank you everyone for being here. I know it's a difficult time for everyone, so thank you for carving out the time to think deeply about writing, and it's especially at this time in our lives. I encourage everyone to check out in the chat, we'll get a handy link to your closest local bookstore so you can go check out the books of these authors. They make great holiday gifts, so shop local. And then check out What to Your Writers Club. If you have any questions about the resources that we offer, let us know. If you are a club member and you are writing out of the events of 2020, we're going to showcase work on January 15th. We're going to have a virtual reading of work that has been created in response to events in 2020. So just email me. We'll get my email in the chat as well. Glad you could come back, Vanessa, just in time to sign off. Thank you so much again for all your time, panelists. And I just wish everyone a happy holiday, a safe holiday, and all the best in your creative practice. Thanks for being here.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
Jody.
Thank you.
Everyone stay safe.
Thank you, Jody. Thank you, Bill.